Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Mardek, and of course last time we successfully completed Charla's arena run, and it was a little bit on the difficult side. We only have a few more arena runs remaining now at this point, of course. As for who is next on our list, it is none other than Donovan here. Let's take a close look at what Donovan has in terms of strengths and weaknesses so we can think strategy before we head in. So he's level 38, which is definitely on the higher side relative to other people that we've had do their arena runs thus far. So that means that before we add anything, he's already above 1000 HP, so that's great. And MP also looking strong, just shy of 280 there. In terms of his attributes, he is fairly well-rounded, starting off with 14 strength, 14 vitality, 17 spirit, and 13 agility. Spirit is a little bit above average, agility maybe slightly below average, but nothing major that we might need to compensate for here. Of course, as we saw with Charla, Donovan is also a little bit of a hybrid between a physical attacker and a magic attacker. Donovan is a little bit more of a natural physical attacker than Charla, a little bit less of a spellcaster than she is because his starting strength is a little bit higher than Charla's and his starting spirit is a little bit lower. But what with the items that we put on here, I think that we'll still be in decent shape for both of those things. So, with that being said, let's take a look at what we can equip. So, as we saw with Charla, we're going to have many of the same options here, with both of them being spear users, and the Obelisk is the strongest of our spears with 40 base attack. It is still not quite as strong as some other people's strongest weapons. For example, Zack's Yin and Yang, his strongest weapon is all the way up at 46 damage, and Slinic's Draco Crescent is even higher than that. So 40 is okay. Donovan, as we said, is a better physical attacker than Charla is, so that'll mean we'll be able to do a little bit more damage with those physical attacks. There are other alternatives, yes, in terms of the Fire Fang, that being our next strongest spear. Slightly lower attack, and it does deal fire damage. We were saying previously that maybe you can make the case that under the most niche of scenarios, that might be helpful for Charla to give her access to another type of elemental damage that she would not otherwise have access to. However, Donovan is first and foremost a fire user, so that means that this is not really adding anything. We are definitely going to want to go with the Obelisk here. In terms of chest plates, the Night Jacket has absolutely been our go-to, what with its very high dark resistance and decent fire, water, air, and earth resistance as well. The weakness here is the lack of physical defense and lack of magic defense, so either if we were to use this, we'd want to find other ways to make up for that, or if we think that's a major concern, then we might choose to go an entirely different route. We could, if we wanted to go all out on one specific resistance, also go for the Geo Jacket. That would be earth resistance there, and give us a little bit of extra vitality and HP. We might want to pick up a little bit more, because we are, yes, a little bit above 1000 HP. There are, theoretically, some enemies that might be able to deal that much damage in one hit. Of course, our primary objective is to make sure that, from an HP standpoint, Donovan does not get one shot, because in that case, even if we're on 1 HP, we can just heal our next turn and get back up to full, or close to it. So, 1 vitality, 20 HP, probably not going to be a big difference maker there, but that's an option. Then the Lesser Rainbow Shirt is a bit of a middle ground, but with the higher defense and okay magic defense with 3. And then it does have some resistances, 10 for fire, water, air, earth, light, and dark. And the Night Jacket does have great resistances. It doesn't have any light resistance though, so Lesser Rainbow Shirt is definitely a little bit better in that regard. But across the board, although it is covering a few more resistances, the total resistances, when you add all those up, definitely far less than the Night Jacket, so it is a little bit of a compromise in that regard. Then there are some other in-between options. The Shaman's Vestment, Gloria's starting robe here, does give okay defenses, 3 defense and 5 magic defense, a little bit of spirit, a little bit of MP, and 50% earth resistance. I think that we're probably not going to end up going this route, but if you're looking for something in between, say, a Geo Jacket and something a little bit more defensive, then this could be the right option for you. Similar story with the Inventing Coat, and with the Dark Robe, just these are giving fire resistance and dark resistance. Then there are, of course, the Stoles. The Steel Stole being the physical defensive option, also giving 50% resistance to physical damage, but with no magic defense, I'm hesitant to go this route with almost anyone other than perhaps Solar. So if you are really concerned about physical attacks, then you could go this route, but I'm going to pass on this one for us. Then if we wanted to make up for Donovan's slightly lower spirit than Charla, then using something like the Azure Stole to get 6 spirit on a chestplate, that would be the best way to do that. I don't really think that's necessary. It would perhaps make it easier for us to more consistently take people out in one turn, but I think there are other ways to make sure that we can do that, or at least come close to doing that, so I think we're going to be fine without it. If we did want to make a point of loading up on more HP, then the green stole would definitely be the most effective way to do that, but with its +6 vitality from the chestplate spot. But I think that we probably don't need quite that much. Donovan is close to being where we want to be, and so just picking up a little bit of vitality here or there, or using some passive skills to boost it, that might be enough. So this might be overkill. Then if we wanted to go the physical attacking route, then the Scarlet Stole would be best here with +6 strength. And we were talking about maybe could entertain the option of doing that with Charla. It would sort of be compensating for her slightly weaker physical attacks than she has with her spells. Donovan, as we said, is a little bit more even between those two. He's stronger with physical attacks than Charla is. So this does mean that he would be a legitimate physical attacker in this case. That you could, yes, make a case, could be worthwhile if we are trying to save our MP, then it might be nice to be able to rely more heavily on those physical attacks. However, with the Obelisk, which does, in addition to its high attack, also give us +50 MP, +2 strength, and +5 spirit, means that, in all likelihood, I think we saw with Charlotte, she didn't have to use much in the way of MP restoring items. We might have ended up doing a fair bit of that, but I think we were perhaps more aggressive with that than we had to be. So I don't think that's going to be a huge factor, loading up on MP or saving NP. So if the reason for picking up additional strength is to avoid spending MP, then I think that's not really a major concern. So although the Scarlet Stole may be our strongest option, if you know what I mean, it's probably not one of our better options. So for that reason, I think we'll probably go with the Night Jacket instead, because this has of course been very effective for other people. Then if we talk helmets, the Skull Helm is the best in terms of boosting HP with +2 vitality, in addition to 4 defense and 2 magic defense. That's not bad either. That could be just about all the HP we need on Donovan, something like that. But I think there are still other ways to make that happen, so it might not be necessary for us to get the vitality from the helmet spot. Could go with the Elf Cap instead. Also decent defensively with 3 defense, 3 magic defense, and a little bit of earth resistance, so if you don't have as much resistances on, say, something like the Night Jacket, maybe went a different route there, then this could be a way to compensate for that a bit. Also, could be a decent option here. Let's entertain the other ones, though. So, the Black Hat, lower defenses, but the highest in terms of resistances. It is, of course, dark resistance, which means if you are pairing that with the Night Jacket, that's probably overkill because you're already absorbing dark damage here, and how much of a difference is an additional 50% dark resistance going to do? I'd argue probably not much. So I don't think the Black Hat is the right option for us because we are planning on using the Night Jacket. Could also go with the Feather Crest. This has a little bit less in the way of defenses relative to the Elf Cap and the Skull Helm. It does have +1 spirit, so in terms of boosting Donovan's spell power and MP, this would be a little bit of a boost in that regard. But I don't think that's a big enough factor for that to be a real game changer. So for that reason, I think let's go with the Elf Cap. I like how it's well-rounded, and we don't have any major things that we're trying to make up for here, so I think that's good enough. Then, in terms of accessories, of course, the things we've been using on just about everyone else has been the Scarab of Health, combined with the Yellow Fairy. Scarab of Health giving us strong defenses, helping to make up for the lack of defenses on the Night Jacket, and also +5 vitality. This is partially what I mean when I say that, yes, we could have opted to pick up a little bit more vitality from other spots, but this +5 vitality is a lot and could very well be enough. Then the auto regen, that's also a big part, making sure that we can restore some HP without needing to take some time to use items or healing ability, so that's also very strong. And then the little bit of resistances to various statuses, I don't think that's going to be a big factor, but it's a nice little bonus. So this is certainly one of the front runners. The other one being the Yellow Fairy. This is simply something that gives us that auto haste so that we can go twice, and since we have only one person in our party during these arena runs, that means we're going twice as often as we normally would, so basically doubles our power other than the opportunity cost of not being able to put on a different accessory in its place. So if we were concerned about boosting HP more or resistances more, then we could go with something like the Emerald Bangle. 3 defense, 3 magic defense is of course better than the Yellow Fairy, at the very least. And then the 50% Earth Resistance, if we were, say, to not go with the Night Jacket and not have this 20% Earth Resistance here, then that might be a way to make up for it. If you haven't mastered Resist Earth from the Geo Jacket, that might be another reason to go this route here. And the Vitality and HP, yes, that does help. And maybe if you were not to go with the Scarab of Health, then you might want to go with the Emerald Bangles to make up for that. But I think that for the most part, we've already covered for the Earth Resistance because we will be using the Night Jacket and we have mastered Resist Earth. So this is not desperate that we need any of these things here. So I think we're probably doing okay there. And then in terms of the Sapphire Bangle, similar with the defenses and Resist Water instead of Resist Earth. Donovan does not have access to the Resist Water passive ability because that is coming from the Trilobite armors. That's too much of a heavy armor for Donovan to equip. So you could make more of a case for this, at least from a resistance standpoint. In terms of Spirit and MP, it's more of an offensive option than it is a defensive option with the Emerald Bangles. But as we were saying before, at least from an MP standpoint, I don't think that's going to be terribly urgent that we pick up more of that. Maybe the extra Spirit, just for the sake of dealing more damage. That might be a nice thing to have, but I think we're probably going to be alright in that regard. Then finally, we could go with the Eclipse Amulet. Also, very high defenses here, and then +2 Spirit. Also, further boosts Donovan's spell power and MP. And then resistance to both light and dark is great if, say, you aren't using something like the Night Jacket and already picking up more than enough dark resistance. So that means that we're not getting the full value out of the Eclipse Amulet here. So for that reason, I think we'll probably pass on this and go with our usual setup of the Scarab of Health and Yellow Fairy. And then, of course, we will still have our potions here, offensive, HP restoring, status removing, MP restoring, all that stuff. So that will be likely very helpful. We saw that with Sharla, who has limited access to different types of elemental damage, that was a big factor, and Donovan probably will be with him as well. So, with that being said, let's pop on over to his skills, where we can talk a little bit more about that. So in terms of his active skills, yes, like Sharla, who only had air elemental skills, Donovan only has fire elemental skills, and furthermore, his skills are, for the most part, just purely offensive. Sharla did have the ability to heal with Healing Wind, whereas Donovan has no such ability. We were talking about how with Sharla, maybe that's not terribly relevant because in all likelihood we just end up using a healing item, but in case, say, are totally out of potions and you're thinking you can rely on some kind of healing ability, no, Donovan does not have any, so don't get yourself stuck in that kind of situation. So, in terms of what abilities he does have, he starts off with Flame, of course, this being his generic fire spell, so low damage but relatively low MP cost, so if we find that we're going against relatively weak enemies, then we could probably go this route to save up on that MP. We did this a fair bit with Charlotte. I think on a few occasions it got us into a little bit of trouble where we might have overthought it a bit and assumed that we might have been able to take people out with just the weakest spell, and then ultimately it wasn't enough. We had to use multiple abilities to take people out, or our enemies had enough time to turn around and attack us because we didn't take them out immediately. So in terms of how much we use this ability, we'll have to see. Then next we have Blaze, which is basically just the stronger version of Flame. So this is the one that will probably be the ability that we use most often. It is Donovan's highest damage fire spell. It can also target every enemy in the arena, as can Flame, which is a significant distinction because Burn is one ability that Charlotte does not really have an equivalent to, so that's one other place in which they differ a bit. So it only hits one target at most, unlike Blaze and Flame. Its damage, I believe, is roughly somewhere in between Flame and Blaze, but the big difference here is that it can lower enemies' defenses. So that means that if, say, we were planning on doing a little bit of a combination between spells and physical attacks, Burn might be the best way to make that happen, but ultimately I think that's probably not something we're going to end up doing too much. For the most part, we're just going to pick, are we going to want to use spells or are we going to want to use physical attacks? not much of this in between a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So I think we're likely to use a lot of Blaze, a little bit of Flame, not much in the way of Burn. Then we have Null Fire once. This is an ability that is useful against big bosses or other enemies that we're expecting to hit us really hard with fire damage. Against enemies in the arena, of course, we don't really know how many of them are going to use fire skills. We could find that there are precisely none, in which case this does precisely nothing. So for the most part, I think we are going to want to make a point of taking enemies out as quickly as possible so that we can get rid of them before they have the chance to attack us. We're going to spend less time putting on the defensive type of abilities like Nullfire once, so this one we might use once at most, but more likely I think we just won't use it at all. Remove Numbness, this is one that if we were, say, to become numbed, then we could use it, of course, but in all likelihood, we'd probably just end up using a potion, because we will have no shortage of potions to remove those statuses, and also potions we can use whenever, whereas we could theoretically get cursed or silenced, which would prevent us from using this ability here. Then Pyro Shell is a little bit niche. It gives the target a Pyro Shell status, which nullifies fire damage and damages attackers. Like I said, I think for the most part, we're not going to spend much time doing these support type skills. We're going to spend more time using our direct offensive options with things like Burn, Blaze, and Flame. So those are all of Donovan's options. As I said, they are obviously all fire, so for that reason it is big to pick up those elemental damaging potions so that we can have other sources of elemental damage that are things other than fire. In terms of our physical reactions here, we can get a little bit of damage, plus 10, plus 20. Other than that, some odds and ends here. Accuracy, Soul Strike does mean that, at least in the case of Soul Strike, we can turn what would normally be a non-elemental attack, the Obelisk, into a fire elemental attack. Again, that means that pretty much our only flexibility is just non-elemental damage and fire damage, so it's not a lot of flexibility at all in that regard. We do have enough RP here to throw on Quarry Spirit. That does mean that if we're going up against spirits with our physical attacks, we can do 50% more damage, so that'll be a nice little luxury to have. As for whether we remember that we have that when we're trying to calculate in our brains, should we go with physical attacks or spells? That's maybe another question. Then we have Drain HP, which is a good way for us to balance out the offense and defense a bit. We can find that even if we are making a point of attacking, we can still restore a little bit of HP there. Then, I said this previously with Charla, although Poison is arguably Charla and Donovan's best offensive reaction, because Poison can deal some damage over time, that is another one that is typically most effective against major boss enemies, the types that are going to be long battles that take many turns, and therefore the poison damage starts to add up quite a bit. But in the arenas, I think for the most part, we're going to find ourselves going up against weak, but perhaps more numerous types of enemies, and for that reason, the poison is probably not going to have enough time to be a big difference maker here, so we'll put it on because we have enough RP to do it. Our alternative would be to, say, get rid of this and throw on Degeneration. That's another one that is so niche. There are so few situations in which this is relevant, and again, it is mostly with bosses, so I think we will take Poison here, but if you find that you have not leveled up Donovan as much as we have, then you could make the case that getting rid of Poison is probably the first reaction to go here. In terms of physical defenses, don't have that many options for Donovan because he is a robe user, so we'll take everything we can get here. In terms of offensive magic reactions, again, not a ton of options, so plus 10, 20% damage, and then also plus 20% fire damage. Those are all the things that affect Donovan. There is theoretically also the plus 20% air damage that we saw for Charla. That is not relevant for Donovan because, as we saw previously, he doesn't have any air elemental spells. You could throw it on if you really wanted to, but it's not going to do anything. In terms of magic defensive abilities, we have many options here because that is typically the strength of robes. So we have the generic types of damage reduction here, 10, 20, 30. You can throw on all those. Then let's skip down to spell resist 30. Those are the big ones. And then we do still have some RP to spare. So we could go with the damage soak 10. It's a nice way to throw on one additional skill here when we have one remaining RP. Because with that, we do still have enough remaining for one of these element-specific resistances. And so that's a matter of personal preference and trying to guess which type of element we think we're going to go up against the most enemies for. And so we do already have the Night Jacket on, so we have more than enough dark resistance. We're healing to that. So for that reason, I think probably not the best option to go with this. In terms of Earth, as we saw, we have mastered Resist Earth, so that means as long as we're put on the passive ability for that, probably a little bit less of a need for that one. Resist Air, you could make the case that perhaps this is worthwhile. Donovan does not have either starting resistances or weaknesses to it, so it's a middle ground resistance. He also doesn't have any passive abilities that boost air resistance, so this one, it's an option. Resist Water, I would argue, is maybe the front runner, because Donovan, being a fire elemental character, starts off with fire resistance, meaning that resist fire, maybe not as relevant, and he starts off with water weakness. So for that reason, I'd say, yeah, if we had to go in blind here and just take a guess as to which type of element we'd like to have a little bit more resistances for, I'd say let's go for the one that we are naturally the weakest against, that being water, so that we are, again, trying to make a point of just making it so that Donovan does not get one shot. Water would be the type of damage that is most likely to do that of the ones that we see here. In terms of passive abilities, let's start off at the bottom here with our resistances, because I think that those are usually the ones that we want to prioritize. So, Resist Dark, as we were saying, what with the Night Jacket equipped, probably not something that we need all that much. Resist Earth perhaps would be a higher priority, and then we could also go with Rainbow Aura for 20% resistances across the board. That is very nice, it does give us that versatility. So then we have 4 RP remaining. Question here is how best to use that, and that is enough for some kind of status immunity, so we could consider doing that. Immunity to curses would be nice, because that is the status that prevents us from using any of our abilities at all, so that would shut us down quite a bit in the way of dealing spell damage. Would still be able to use our physical attacks, and as we were saying, Donovan is a little bit better at that than Charla is, so maybe that's not quite as much of a concern, but that likely does mean that we'd still want to take a turn to remove the curse, and then, and only then, would we be going back to attacking with either physical or magic abilities. So, you could make the case for that. Otherwise, Insomnia, getting rid of sleep, that's another one that I've said in the past, is a bit of a concern, because that means that you might not be taking your turn, and then that means that you can't use things like items to remove the status. So that could be another decent option there. You could also go something like plus 10% HP. We'd probably want to take a closer look at where exactly we ended up from an HP standpoint to see if we feel like we need a little bit more. So that is an option, yes. Otherwise, we could go with some attributes here. Boosting strength, we want to do a little bit more on the physical attacks. Vitality, again, another way to boost HP a little bit more if we're concerned about where we are in that regard. Or Spirit, if we feel like we want to do more spells. Agility, I think, of the attributes, probably the least relevant here. Donovan is not that speedy, so I think we will likely see that there are several enemies that will go before him. So you could maybe make the case that picking up a little bit more agility might be useful, so that way you're taking out enemies before they have the chance to attack and deal damage to you. But I think I'm leaning toward going with the 10% HP or the Purity. Let's go Purity for the curse immunity. That way, just removes one potential thing that could complicate matters quite a bit. So, let's take a look at where that leaves us. Donovan is now at 1,500 HP. I think that is a solid place for us to be. 250 MP, also not bad at all. In terms of attributes, yes, we saw that we boosted Vitality a fair bit. Then resistances. This is a big one, so we saw we are using the Night Jacket, so yes, more than enough Dark Resistance. We threw on the passive ability for Earth Resistance, and that also brings us above 100% Earth Resistance as well. And then when we throw on the Rainbow Aura, it gives us a little bit of resistances for everything else. Fire, what with Donovan being a fire elemental character, he's doing a little bit better on that. And then, as we saw, air is sort of a middle ground, and then water is on the lower end with light, ether, and fig. So that's why I think that turn on the magic resistance for water is probably best, so that way we're at least risk of getting one shot, because fire, air, earth, and dark are all elements that we have more resistances to already. So I like where that leaves us. Let's heal and save up, and then we'll head in. Okay, so let us begin the survival tournament for Donovan. Best of luck to you, Donovan. And who will we have here? We'll be starting off with a bunch of topazes. If we look at these guys, these are enemies way back from, I believe it was the Sun Temple, and a little bit after that as well. So fortunately, they are weak to fire damage, so that is fantastic, because that means that we should be able to take them out fairly easily with one thing. They do have a lot of physical defense, so that means that we probably would prefer to use a magic ability here, which means we will likely need to spend some MP. They only have 150 HP, which means that we might be able to get by with just a flame. Let's give this a shot. Absolutely. No problem at all. Okay, so off to a strong start here. Saved a little bit of MP by going with just the flame. Pick up the topaz as well, sure. After this, some yellow souls. Okay, we saw some of these in previous arena runs. However, we've not actually seen them out in the wild yet. They are normally pretty difficult enemies. They do have 40 defense and 10 magic defense. However, they are weak to fire, and for that reason, we might be able to take advantage of that with, say, something like a blaze. Maybe take them out in one turn that way. Possibly even a flame. We saw that we would have dealt enough damage based on how much damage we dealt to the previous enemies, just those ones had 0 magic defense, whereas these ones have 10. So we will deal a little bit less damage here. The flame might not quite be enough, so I'm thinking we probably do go with the blaze. However, we did take a little bit of damage there. Perhaps we actually want to pass a turn in order to heal off that 40 damage that we took. So if we do this here, that'll bring us back up to full with the regen. Then we blaze both of you here, and that's absolutely enough damage as well. Might have been able to get by with just a flame. But as I said previously, I think that we have enough MP that I'm not terribly concerned. We don't want to be throwing it around like crazy. But as long as we're somewhat mindful of it, I think we'll be fine. Skelezard, also quicker than us. Yeah, I think almost every enemy, other than the first ones, were going faster than us. So as we anticipated, does mean that Donovan will take some hits here. The Skelezard, we saw these guys in the Miasmal Citadel. They were typically, I think, higher level than just 23, so this one should have a little bit lower HP. Does have 50% weakness to fire. 30 defense means that physical attacks are going to be pretty tough, but if we were to use maybe even just a flame, that might work. Might need to use 2 of them. If that is the case, I don't think that's the end of the world, because we are not quite on full HP here. So we do not take him out, but our regen brings us back to full HP on our next turn. This time, we could maybe even use a physical attack, and that might be enough. Just barely. Okay, yes, we saved a little bit of MP in that case. And I think if we just do a few fights in which we save a little bit of MP here and there, should mean that we are in very good shape in that regard. Okay, so lots of undead enemies from Saul's dungeon here. And once again, they are quick, but they are, for the most part, dealing dark damage, that being Ether at the end there. So that one did hurt, but the other ones actually healed us. However, the other damage wasn't too bad. We were actually able to heal it all off with the regen. So let's take a closer look at what these guys look like defensively. For the most part, undead enemies are weak to fire. So that is the case for the Ghast, as well as the Blood Zombie. The Green Soul spirits tend to be pretty strong with resistances. However, fire is the weakest of those resistances, at least with regard to the major elements here. So probably means that, yeah, we're still doing okay. If we were to, say, use a Blaze, that might be enough to take you out as well. Then lastly, the Ghoul, also weak to fire damage. So I think that we are already on full HP, so if we just use a Blaze here, that likely could be enough. I'm not sure we'd have enough damage with just a Flame. That gas with almost 900 HP, that makes me a little bit nervous. Let's go this route here, and yes, I think, given how much damage we're seeing here, we probably did need to go with the Blaze, the stronger option, rather than just the Flame. We actually got a lot of items here. We don't have that much inventory space right now, so, okay, we'll take them, but in some ways we're hoping for not too much more of that. Okay, now here things get complicated. We have some water enemies, which would have been very tricky for us, because of course, as we were saying before, Donovan is naturally weakest to water. We did throw on the magic defensive reaction in that regard, so we should be taking far less damage for that reason. But if you had not done that, then this could be one of the more difficult rounds here. So we have the Eye Orb, which is 50% resistant to fire, So that's not really something that we like to see. Also, 10 magic defense means that we might even want to go with a physical attack and not hit our Soul Strike offensive reaction, so that way it stays non-elemental. That might be best. The Eye Orb spawns, also 50% resistant to fire. They have very high magic defense, whereas nothing in the way of physical defense is here. So that's another interesting one. It seems like in many cases we are better served using physical attacks. I do think that maybe we can take out the Eye Orb spawns with just one physical attack here, even with our reaction, and that, I'm pretty sure, was very, very close. I did hit the reaction, as we were saying. It might be better to not do that so that it isn't fire elemental damage, instead it's non-elemental. Let's try that here. Yeah, definitely more damage. Does mean that the Eye Orb has the chance to take a turn, and it dealt some damage, did lower our defenses a bit there by 1, but we did heal off the damage, so at least short term, no major issues. Of course, if you continue to lower our defenses, then that might start to become a bit more of a concern. So, I think we probably do go with physical attacks, none of these here, because, like we were saying, we do have some magic defense, not a ton, but some, and we probably do prefer to use the physical elemental attacks, so we won't hit our reaction. That means 500 damage is not great. Our other alternative would be, this could be a time to use one of our potions to deal earth damage instead, because that certainly looks like it would be the highest damage route here. How much damage? A little over 1,000. It does go with a shield, so now that means we'll deal less damage with physical attacks, and might still be best to go with the bottle of acid here. It was more damage than we saw with our physical attacks, and yes, that was around the same amount of damage we dealt with our physical attacks on that previous one. However, the shield was cutting the damage in half, so that was the reason why. We would have seen that our physical attacks also would have gone down. Oh, and I totally was caught sleeping there and did not realize we were about to have a reaction to hit, and so I missed it. And because it was water damage, that means that that one hurt a bit. So even though we probably could take out the Eye Orb here, might want to deliberately just bide our time a bit, maybe take this as an opportunity to restore some MP, have the regen restore some HP when we take our next turn. So, do we need Nether? Can we get by with just a Mana Berry? Maybe we can do just a Mana Berry. I don't think it's going to restore all of our MP, but it'll get a large chunk of it back. Then we don't restore all of our HP with that regen. We get a bit back, but let's finish you off with a bottle of acid, because of course if we don't, then you're going to take another turn, and presumably we will take more damage. So that will do it there. Definitely our hardest round thus far by considerable margin. But we are now more than halfway through. So these guys, more water elemental enemies, that is not a sight we like to see. Does mean that, well, water damage is not very good for us, and also physical damage, not great either. Donovan is almost at half HP here. This might be the lowest HP we've seen anyone go other than Slinik when we got trapped in the arena. So that is getting a bit concerning. The Angry Cods, in terms of how we would want to damage them, be another case of using those Earth Elemental damaging potions. They do have 10 defense, no magic defense, so if we were to use spells, that might be a little bit better, but of course that would mean that we're doing fire damage, and that means we're dealing half damage. So, tell you what, if we were to use our own attacks, we'd probably rather to use physical attacks, not hit our reaction, make it non-elemental, so that way we don't have any concerns about having our damage by having it be fire elemental. But I think the big question is mostly, do we heal up here, or do we use a bottle of acid, reduce their damage? I think we lead off with bottle of acid, try to take some of these guys out, because we only have 2 turns here, and that means that no matter what we do, we are likely going to see that at least one of these guys survives, unless we were to have gone with attacking all of them with magic abilities, but as we said, that was likely to be a lower damage option. So now that we only have 1 remaining, they're a little bit less of a threat. Now I think we can consider biding our time a little bit and restoring some HP if we feel that's necessary. We could go that route. I think maybe what we do here, let's use just a better potion which will heal 200 HP. That might be just about the amount we need, because of course we'll also regen at the start of our next turn, bringing us very close to full HP. Not quite full, but I think that if we were to say, just use a bottle of acid here, that should finish you off. then that means that, although that was a tricky one, we're still getting by with most of our HP and MP remaining. So a bit of a scare, but we were able to recover. And the happy Johnny is these guys can be tricky because they have 70% evasion, so that means that attacks are going to be hard to hit. They are, however, very weak to fire, and evasion does not affect spells, so I'll tell you what, we actually have a very straightforward solution here. We might be able to take it out with just a single flame. That we can. So that is actually a nice little reprieve after what we saw in the previous round. Round 8, we're getting close to the end here. Okay, now this also is a tough one. Magmazards, they are fire elemental enemies, so they will deal some fire damage and physical damage here, which we have some resistance to fire for sure. Problem with them is that they heal to fire damage. So this is another case of, if we were to use our own abilities, then we definitely would not want to use any spells, because those are all fire damage. If we were to use an attack, then we would want to make sure that we do not hit our reactions, so that way it's non-elemental damage rather than fire. However, this does seem like another one of those cases where using the offensive potions is certainly the most effective way of maximizing your damage, so I think we might be able to take them out in one hit apiece. Let's go for it here. Definitely does seem like that's the case. So we do this again. We also restored all the HP that we lost with our regen, so that means no issues here. So if you did not have your offensive potions, that would have been significantly more difficult, and with that, we pick up a fire damage one. Not terribly relevant for Donovan, but for other people, perhaps. Round 9, second to last round, means at times we've seen mini-bosses in and around this area here, so could start to get very difficult. Water Elemental means that it does, of course, have the potential to do a fair bit of water spell damage, so another instance of trying to put on more water resistance and equipping that water magic defensive reaction. That might be a big difference maker here. However, since we have done that, hopefully that means we're in a good place to take you out. You have 20 physical defense, so probably not a good idea to attack you with physical attacks. Also, if we do that, it will trigger your reaction. This enemy does have a reaction specifically when you use physical attacks. It will counter with a water spell, and we probably don't want ourselves getting hit by more water spells than we have to. So for that reason, I think magic is almost certainly the answer here. However, problem is you are 100% resistant to fire damage. So for that reason, I think that this enemy is a bit of a trap. You have 100% resistance to fire damage, and our spells are only fire damage, so we cannot use those at all. Our physical attacks, if we hit our reaction, are also fire damage, so we can't do that. If we were to deliberately miss our reactions, then we're doing physical damage, which you are still very resistant to, and also have very high defenses to, so our damage would be very low. We would also be triggering your reaction and taking a lot of damage there. Fortunately, we would be minimizing that with our magic water defensive reaction, but if we hadn't done that, then that would be close to a death sentence. So I think that this is definitely an instance of wanting to rely very heavily on our offensive potions. So very important that we picked these up here. I think that Earth should be the way to go. Yes, you are weakest to that. So let's try this one here. I'm hoping this is enough damage to take it out in one turn. It is. So easy answer if you have those. If you don't, that round is far and away more difficult than what we just saw. This is the last round here, though. What will we have? Likely a mini-boss of some variety. It is another Griffin. We've seen at this point, what, is this our third in the arena? So common in that way, and fortunately, you are very weak to fire. So that means that this one should be a pretty straightforward use a blaze, and we might even be able to take you out in just one turn here. Not quite. But of course, since we have haste, we can do this again, and second time, it's the charm. So with that, Donovan proved successful, completing his arena run. Well done. Pick up another Griffin Feather and Speedy Juice from that. And congratulations, fighter. You've won the tournament, apparently. Here, have a prize. Also, get out of here. Alright, so well done, Donovan. Let's take a closer look at what you picked up as your reward. It was the Flame Charm, 4 defense, 4 magic defense, a special item that Donovan won from the arena. Only he can equip it. So it also gives the magic plus 20% numb offensive reaction which is a little bit unusual because we've seen mostly either no skills at all or new active skills from people's arena reward items. Charla and Donovan the only ones thus far who have gotten new reactions from it, and fitting what with it being numb for Donovan, with numb being the statuses most closely tied to fire damage, and then paralysis for Charla, that being the status that is most closely tied to air damage. Other than that, 4 defense, 4 magic defense, only usable by Donovan, gives +4 spirit, useful for dealing more damage with spells, having more MP, and +2 vitality, not bad either. Resistance to fire is helpful to further boost Donovan's strongest resistance, and then 20% resistance to water, also covering for his weaknesses there. So well done, Donovan, picking this one up. And let's have a quick chat with our latest arena champion. What do you have to say about that, Donovan? Sir Mardek, would you be able to relate at all if I told you I had an identity that I've been keeping secret almost all my life, since I was a child, which nobody really knows about, since I don't know how people's thoughts of me would change? Donovan, that is way more of a loaded question than you realize. I'd say it's a fair bet that he can. I mean, I can. Yes. Rohoff jumps in. Yeah, I suppose Rohoff and Mardek can both relate. I thought maybe you might. Maybe I should just get over my worries and stop kidding myself. I am who I am, and I should let others know. How they react to the news is, well, there's nothing I can do about that. If they hate me, they hate me. But at least they'd be hating me rather than loving a fraud. Well, what's your secret? I'm a prince. Wait, what? Donovan! Huh? Oh, it's you, Mardek. That's right. A prince. Prince of Gosnor, to be precise. Heir to the throne. The king is my father, and if he dies or, abdicates, then I'll be the king. Okay, yeah, that's a pretty big secret, Donovan. I'll give you that. Oh, that's quite a secret. Though I don't know why you kept it as one. Wouldn't being a prince get you loads of respect and stuff? That's the thing. I would get loads of respect, yes, from my friends, from strangers, but they'd be respecting the title, not who, but what I am. People who didn't know me would respect me, and I don't like that thought, because I wouldn't have earned their respect. I'd merely have inherited it. I was proud when I was little. I lorded over the other little children with my title, boasted about what I had that they didn't, and of course, this meant that they generally wanted nothing to do with me. I didn't have friends, just money and a title. As I got older, maybe I was 10 or so, I started realizing how, well, obnoxious it all was. I suppose I was lonely, but I also came to hate what I was. How I was acting as if I deserved respect, when I really didn't. Since then, I've been of the mind that respect is most certainly earned, and without that aspect, it's not really respect at all. So I started pretending I was just another commoner, that I was nothing special, and people just saw me for what I was and accepted me. I had friends for the first time. My dad went along with it too, pretending I was no different to the others in the guard when I was training for that. I would rather people judge me on my actions, not my blood, so I will probably continue to keep this secret for a while. Thank you for listening, though, Sir Mardek. It's relieving to have told someone after all these years. Well, have you even told Charla? Charla, my oldest friend. She was one of the first who befriended me after I started my commoner act. I can see she has strong feelings for me, and I would not want to ruin what she fell in love with. Whoa, fell in love, you say? I mean, let's be honest, we have a pretty good sense those two have feelings for one another, but I mean, that is still perhaps a little presumptuous to assume that you can just drop the L word like that. One of these days, though, she will have to know what is wrong to lead her on falsely. Not right now, though. I shall need more preparation for such a world-shattering confession. Alright, and with that, thank you, Donovan, for giving us a little bit more insight as to, well, some pretty big secrets that you've been holding back on us. And congratulations for completing your arena run and picking up the Flame Charm. So, who is next on our list? tune in next time to find out.